Welcome back. So in this video we're going to continue making our temple. We're going to duplicate around these pillars into the various corners of this temple, and we're going to talk about a few other tools that might serve you well. So the first thing, to recap here, what we have is right now we have our temple base, and we have our pieces of our pillar here broken into 5 different objects. You want to practice clean modeling or animation functions when we get to that as much as you possibly can. So let's talk about a few things that you could do here. For example, if I click on this base piece right here and I look over in my channel box at the very top one, right now the default name is P cylinder 01, but now that I'm creating multiple cylinders, we got P cylinder 6 and P cylinder 5 and so on. So it wasn't a big deal when we were doing the examples, but now that we're starting to have more and more objects here, it might be a good idea to name these. You can name this a couple different ways. The most common way is honestly to click on the word in the channel box and it will highlight that, and I missed there. Click on the word in the channel box and it will select it by default blue, and you can change this to whatever you want. So just click on the name, and you could call this whatever you want. I'm not gonna really go in and tell you what you should name things. Naming convention is really up to you, but I will say it does matter because when you have to troubleshoot things down the line, it's nice to know what something is. So again, I just gotta call this temple base, and so it's a good idea to practice this. So click on this and rename it. It'll come to the next one, and I'm just gonna call this pillar, bottom. And again, you can call these whatever you want. I just advise that you start naming things. Maybe I'll add numbers on the end of these to help distinguish them so it's not so bad. So I have 2 pillar bottoms, pillar main. I'm just coming through renaming these, and again, this will serve you down the road if needed. On that one, and pillar top 02. So I named all these things something other than just P cylinder. Now another way you can do this, and actually brings us to a great point, and one reason we named these to begin with, is we can open up a list format of things in our scene, which is why we want to name stuff, which is very convenient for selecting. We talked about how selecting things, we can click on them, hold down shift, and click on them, but we can also select things through things called the outliner, and you can get to the outliner by default right here on the left hand side. It's a little icon. It looks like a bunch of like an outline, something you would see in Word or something like that. If you click on this, it will open up the outliner. The outliner again is a list format of everything in your scene, and it starts with, by default, having the cameras listed here. So list all your different cameras here. They're generally grayed out, meaning don't mess with them, but they're there. You can select your cameras and you can mess with them, and again, we'll talk about that later. In the middle section will be all the objects that you have created up to this point. So you can see here, I can click over here and I can select these through the outliner. And after all the objects that you've created in the menu, there's these funny looking icons here. These are your default lights that Maya creates to light the scene. Generally, you don't play with these either. These are for highly, highly customized work, situations at like studios and stuff like that. They might mess with these, but most time, I haven't had a professional reason to ever mess with these. So just go ahead and leave them alone for the most part. Now, this outliner, and as well as most windows in Maya, can be torn off. So if you have 2 monitors, for example, you can actually click and hold on the word outliner right here and drag this off and have it be a floating window. So Maya is pretty customizable like that. And again, you can turn it on and off by just clicking that little icon there. So if you want this floating, maybe you have a second monitor, you can do that. If you want to put it back, just click and hold on the up here, and you can drag it around. It's kind of had a hard time getting in there. There it goes. Looking for that blue line. And there you go. You see it's back in that section right there. So I'm going to leave it as the default settings for the purpose of the lectures, but you can move those around as much as you like. And again, some people, you can actually tear off the channel boxes and things like that as well. So that's the outliner. I'm going to go ahead and leave that open for now. And that's one of the great ways to select things. So we are going to duplicate this and move these around, but we're going to do it in a tricky way. So if I come in here and I start selecting all these, and I come in here and I hit Control D, I can sure enough duplicate this whole pillar and move it over. But sometimes it's easier to work in with organizations and having things put into groups. Groups is a null object node. It's just an empty node object that you can put things into. Same thing, ideas like kind of like putting files in a folder on a PC. So to make a group, it's pretty straightforward. All you have to do is select the objects in any order, get all the objects you want in your scene that want to be in a group. In this case, my pillar. And with those objects selected, you hit Control G. Control G on your keyboard. Make sure it's not just G, because remember G from last lecture was repeat your last tool. So it has to be Control G, and it'll create a group. And you can see in my outliner, it automatically created this little icon that says group. The entire thing turned green, and the pivot point, which is the little arrows, they went to the origin. Whenever you make a group, the pivot point by default goes to the origin. So you can see the pivot point went to the origin. In this case, I'm going to use this to my advantage, but sometimes people don't like that. If you want to move the pivot point back to the object, that's easy. I'll get to that. But by default, again, for this exercise, we actually do want it at the origin. So first things first. The group here in the outliner, you can see has a little arrow, plus icon, which can let me open and close the group. Again, a group is kind of like a folder on a desktop PC. If I click off of this and click back on an object, it selects the individual objects, just like if you were to grab a file in a folder. So this is intentional. It's not merging these objects together, it's just organizing them. So Maya has a way to reference them all together. So if you click on something and you want the group again, you're like, okay, well, yes, I could go through the outliner and click on group. That will select them all. The other way to do it is if you click any object in the group, you can move up the hierarchy. And this is a sort of a primitive hierarchy here. If I hit the up arrow on my keyboard, it will move up in the hierarchy. In this case, it's going to move up the chain to the group. So I hit the up arrow, selects the group. And again, the group has its pivot point, and you can see it's the same group. So again, this allows you to move things around. If you wanted to, for some reason, if you say to make something bigger or smaller, move it, you don't have to tear apart the object. You just make the changes, and you still have the group when you need it. So that's the group. I'm going to go ahead and rename this. I'll call it Pillar 1. There's my group. You can rename your group, and I can now just duplicate the group, and I can move the group around. It has that weird pivot point that's off, but I could do that. But I'm not going to do that. In fact, the reason I had you guys build it this way is we can take advantage of this, and we're not going to use the move function. In fact, we're going to use the rotate function. So I am going to duplicate this, but instead of trying to translate it around, I'm going to rotate it. That way I can get perfect placement in each corner in this particular case. And I'm going to show you a few more tricks that you can do. So if I hit Control D, it's going to duplicate the pillar. And again, I have the pillar selected, the group. And Control D, it's going to make another pillar. And I'm going to click on the rotate tool instead, which again is the E key. So there we go, we'll switch to the E key. And again, the pivot point currently was put at the origin. And if I grab these lines and move it, in this case it's the Y, and I kind of, oh, that's that one, that's the one I want. But beginners might not be 100% familiar. So you can always grab and figure out which one it is. And you can start rotating it. And if I start rotating this, you can see, like, oh, there's about right. And look, it's very close to -45 in this case. And that makes sense because this is, we're trying to do 8 pillars, 8 divided by 360, and so on. So math, yes, you can't escape it. It's everywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and select the rotate Y and type in -45, and you can see it is pretty much perfect, unless my placement was off on my original ones, but it's perfectly in that corner because, again, the pivot point was at the origin and it rotates around. So again, I duplicated the object with Control D, that's the group, and then I used the rotate tool to go around in the rotation to get that placement now. Now I can come in here and hit Control D and keep doing this. For example, hit Control D again, and I mean, you could probably do the math here, -90, and so forth. But here's a nice little trick for you guys if you want to, me about all my time-saving tricks. If I hit Control D and make a copy like I did last time, delete that one. Let's start from here. Hit Control D, and I copy and rotate this, and I do nothing else. It's very important that I don't click off things. Like, I get the numbers where I want it. In this case, it's rotating 45 degrees, and I have it rotated. And if you immediately hit Shift D, not Control D, Control D is for the first one, but if you hit Shift D, you can duplicate again, but you'll use the exact same transforms that you did previously. So in this case, I rotated 45 degrees, -45 degrees. So if I hit Shift D again, it's going to repeat that. So again, Shift D, Shift D, Shift D, Shift D. So it goes all the way around. So this is a very powerful way if you need to make a lot of things evenly spaced. Let's say if for example, I needed to make a fence or something, or again for environmental modeling, and I get Control D for my first copy and I move it, and then I hit Shift D. Made a mistake, so you got to be careful again. It's very touchy in that regards. So Control D, and then Shift D. So you can see we can get a fence or something like that. And you can get kind of crazy things as well. And any transform, it will replicate. So again, if I do Control D for the first one, move it, rotate it, and I don't know, we'll scale it. This is going to look really bizarre, but there we go. I did 3 different things, and then I do Shift D. Again, I made a mistake. Almost there. And then Shift D, and you can see you get kind of crazy results there. You just got to be careful that you don't accidentally click off it. So it takes a little bit of practice. So again, Control D for the very first duplication, then Shift D after that. So there we go. If you not like the rotation method, you're like, it's too difficult, you're more than welcome just to use the translate tool. In that particular case, what I would do is I'd move the pivot point back to the center of the pillars. So for example, if that's you're having a hard time with the rotation method, what you can do instead is you can move the pivot point back to the center of these objects, and there is a quick way to do that. If you have the pillar selected and you go up to Modify, Center Pivot, it will put the pivot point pretty much at the center of all the objects that are currently selected. So in this group, it'll throw it right about there. So if you do it that way, then of course you can just hit Control D, make a copy, and in this case, if you're doing it this way, I would go into my top view and once again use our friendly X key, holding down the X button, and grid snap, and you can see it's not quite perfect because this particular case doesn't line up. So you will have to eyeball it because this doesn't fall on the grid exactly, but you can, you can easily get these ones, but you're going to have to kind of eyeball it in this particular case. So if you don't want to do the rotation, that is absolutely fine. Just you want to probably center the pivot point. It will make your life a little bit easier to do that. And again, to center a pivot point on something with an object selected, in this case, a group is an object. It's just a null object that's empty. You go to Modify, Center Pivot, and that'll put the pivot point back at the objects that you have selected. All right. So there's the pillars. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put on a top on this, and I'm going to probably put like some molding across the top before I do that. So I'm going to do, just again, this is not meant to be the most, spectacular temple, but, something easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go into my top view, just because it'll be easier to eyeball this in the top view, seeing all the pillars. And I'm going to go ahead and go to Create, Polygon Primitive, and create a torus, or a fancy word for a donut. And again, my first click and hold will determine my radius, and then my second click and hold will determine my thickness of the radius. And again, just kind of eyeball something. I did it in the top view. We can come in here and zero these out before we move it. And again, it creates it on the grid. So select your torus after you're done. Hit the W key, move it up a little bit, and if you want to adjust it, feel free to adjust it. Again, this is why we're taking all the time to talk about the inputs, because they're very valuable down the line to block in the basics of more complex models. So if I wanted to, maybe I'll do 8, and then maybe I will play with the section radiuses, and I'm just kind of playing right now. Like, oh yeah, maybe make it less round. Maybe I want this to be 8 also. I don't know if I care for that. Maybe I'll scale it down. Maybe I'll do this, kind of flatten it, something like that. Don't like that either. So maybe what. This is part of the process. I don't particularly like that, and this is why it's very valuable to play with these. So what, I'm going to try something different. Go back to my top view. In this case, I'm going to create Polygon Primitive, and what, I'm going to do a ring. I think I'm going to do a ring, or a pipe, I should say. So I do a pipe. Once again, drag out, drag for the height, and the last one's the thickness. So you can saw that I did those. And there we go. There is a pipe, but I kind of made something more like that. And granted, oops, not 90, we want 9, and then maybe I'll do 1, yeah, and then I'll do thickness, I'll do, I don't know, 2, I'll make this pretty thick. Okay, looking at that a little bit more, maybe we'll make the radius a little bit thick, higher. And again, remember from our previous lecture, if we click on the word and middle mouse click in here, we can interactively change these. And again, all I'm doing is I'm clicking on the word, hovering my mouse in this viewport, middle mouse clicking, holding, and dragging back and forth. So sometimes it's a little bit easier to do these interactively when you get further along. So there we go, I kind of like that. Alright, go to my side view. Again, just don't want any floating geometry. It's a little bit off. Again, just kind of get this a little bit closer to what we want. So there we go, something like that. Alright, so one last thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a sphere. And again, I'm going to do this in the top view, because this will be easier, once again, to eyeball the initial size. Not that we can't change it later, but I'm going to go ahead and go create Polygon Primitive Sphere. Click in the middle here, drag out a sphere, click and hold. There you go, looks good. Let go, and tap the space bar, come back to my perspective view. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring up the sphere so it's about half of it is above that ring that I just created, something like that. Alright? You can see the sphere here is going to end up being the top dome. Now, we haven't talked about it in detail, but what we're going to do is we're going to cut this in half, and this is our introduction into subcomponent modeling. So to cut this in half with the sphere selected, we're going to right click and hold. And we're going to talk about subcomponents in detail in the next lecture, our future lecture. But what we're going to do is we're going to right click and hold, and we're going to go to face mode, which is one of these subcomponent modes that's available to us. And what this allows us to do is now select pieces of this object. So again, right click and hold on the object, hover over face, and let go. And what you can do now is you can select those individual subdivisions, and manipulate them. You can do all kinds of things with this. There's a lot of things you can do with this. But what we're going to do to keep it simple is we're going to tap our spacebar instead, and we're going to go to any one of our either front or side views, and we're going to uh, navigate our viewport to be something like this. And then I'm going to click and hold. And the great thing is when you're in subcomponent mode is you can start making these selections outside the object. And as long as you get a piece of the object, you don't have to worry about selecting other things. So my marquee right now is touching the pillars and the sphere, but you don't have to worry because the only thing it can select by default in this mode is whatever is in subcomponent mode. So as long as you get a piece of it, it's going to select only the subcomponents of whatever you currently have in subcomponent mode. So in this case, the sphere. So I let go here. I'm going to drag a box, and it's going to, remember, it selects through. We're using this to our advantage. I'm going to select the whole bottom half of this sphere. If I look around, and it's a good idea to always do this anyway, look around. Okay, there is my sphere, the bottom half selected, and I'm just going to hit the backspace or delete key on my keyboard, and voila, we're going to get rid of the bottom half of that dome there. Alright, so I'm going to right click and hold, go back into object mode, and there's the top of our dome. And for consistency, I'm going to go ahead and name these last couple objects here. I don't call this, I'll call it molding, I guess, and I'll call this a dome. Alright, there is our basic temple as of right now. I'm going to go ahead and save this. This has already been saved once, so I don't have to hit save as, unless you do want to do multiple saves, which is always not a bad idea to save incrementally. I'm just going to do Control S to save, and then next time we come back, we're going to talk further about more things that you can do in the process of creating this dome. Hope you enjoyed that. See you next time.